Uh, there we go. Um, so as Ian said, today is part of a number of things that we do as future leaders. Last year and the year before, we ran a number of face-to-face events, which were brilliant, lots of fun. And we realised that it's very hard for people to give up the time and the energy and the money to come and find us somewhere physically. So we've set up a series of monthly workshops or discussion groups that we're running throughout the whole of this year. And today we're talking about feedback in mentoring. And so I'd love you all to introduce yourselves, whether you're a mentor or a mentee or both, whether you've been a mentor, a mentee, or both. And then let's have some great discussions around what useful feedback looks like and how to prepare and deliver that as a mentor and how to receive it and or potentially give it as a mentee as well. So I'm going to start with Saskia because you were first into the room. Well done on your promptness. Um, yeah, over to you.
I don't like being late, so I am generally 5 minutes early for the Zoom meetings, and so the host tends to get a notification that someone's in there 5 minutes early. Um, I'm very new to Future Leaders, and signed up as a mentor, and so I'm looking forward to this session just to gain some really good insight. I do tend to give a lot of advice and sort of hold space for people that need it, but I think that we sometimes problem solve quite quickly, and when sometimes there is a need to simply listen. And so I am hoping to gain a bit more knowledge and insight and tools to hopefully make me hold my tongue a little bit so that I can make sure I've actually listened, really understood what the problem is, and then be able to give really effective feedback. So that's what I'm looking forward to getting out of this session.
Fantastic. Thank you, Saskia. And Marcia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia. I am a mentor. I think I'm with Future Leaders now. I'm just trying to think. I think it's about 18 months now. I've mentored two people, two and a bit people. Kind of started mentoring somebody, and then she dropped out of the program. But yeah, I've been around for 18 months, and I'm also a non-exec director.
Thank you. And Guy?
Yeah, hi. So this is my first Future Leaders event. I mean, I've been talking to Ian about it on and off for probably about a year, potentially just getting more involved. So hoping this is the first of several things that we get to do together. I'm both a mentor and a mentee, so that's why I signed up. I work as a fractional consultant, so I kind of find myself jumping into organizations and then quite often having to help people formally and informally, but there's a couple of people that have kind of asked me to help them, so that's great. And also I've just started a new relationship with I guess an old friend of mine, really, but someone I haven't known that well in the last few years, and he's agreed to be my mentor. He's about 10 years older than me and has done many of the things in his life that I want to do. So I'm both. So I think hopefully this will be quite a useful conversation for me.
Amazing. Thank you, Guy.
Okay.
And Joseph, have you got audio working? Doesn't look like it. Um, I am going to endeavour to multitask and pop something in the chat for Joseph as well. Hopefully, he can hear us at the very least. Um, so, for the whole group, a question to start with while I do a bad job of multitasking. What's the most useful? Okay. Joseph just said he can hear us, but he's just finishing up a call. Amazing. So you are definitely multitasking. Um, we'll get to meet you when you're finished. No stress. So I'd love to know from all of you or from each of you, what's the most helpful feedback that you've ever received in a mentoring relationship or from somebody within your peer group or from outside of your direct line management? And what was it? Why did it land really well? What was incredibly helpful about it?
Do you want me to jump in first, Sarah?
If you have an answer prepared, that would be amazing, Ian.
Um, I didn't have an answer prepared, but as you were talking, I always come back to this one for me. So I was doing a leadership course at an energy business, and the guy running it was a different thinker. I really bought into that. I'm a big fan of trying different ways of doing things, and this guy was bringing some really cool ways of doing things. And we met up after the course, and he kind of did a bit of coaching of me. And he asked how my year had gone, and I said, it started off pretty tough and really quite a difficult environment. And then we had a great end of year. I presented, a really good plan, and the CEO said, "Hey, Ian, well done. That's great. Off you go." And I said how my confidence had moved throughout the year. And his feedback was, "Well, Ian, confidence isn't a pen. It's not something that can be given or taken, you know? And, were you doing kind of like the same things throughout the year?" And I was like, "Yes, I think I was." So, what's happened there is your CEO has taken your confidence away through those difficult times and then given it back to you. You've allowed that to happen. So that's really stuck with me over the years that having confidence, it's not a tangible thing that somebody can take or give. Yet that's kind of how I'd I'd kind of had that relationship with confidence, and I keep coming back to that time and time again when I'm feeling a little bit low on confidence. I keep coming back to it, and it's a bit of feedback I've given to people very often, and I always have a pen in my hand, so it's kind of like it works on many levels. So that's my bit of feedback that's just always stuck with me.
Amazing. And what do you think it was about how it was delivered that really meant that it stuck with you? Was it because it was such a simple metaphor, or was there something else about how it was delivered that meant that it landed so well?
Well, I guess at the time I was really open minded to this guy. So I was sat there feeling really good about the conversation, and therefore I guess I was in flow as far as my brain was working. I wasn't defensive. I wasn't tightened by it, and I was really comfortable with the conversation. So that ultimately kind of really kept me open minded. And I guess I was struggling with my confidence in the peaks and the troughs. So it was
Mm.
almost like it was a well served metaphor that really helped me because I was struggling with it.
Amazing. So he was able to see what was underneath some of those struggles and give you a tool
Yeah,
that was incredibly helpful.
yeah. And whenever I think about it, there was like a real light bulb moment. Oh wow. And when I talk about it with others now that I'm mentoring, there's like that facial expression where they kind of go, "Yeah, of course. What the hell is that about? Why do
Yeah,
we allow people to do that to us?"
yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Ian. Does somebody else have a great example of helpful feedback that you've received from outside of your leadership line that's been really helpful or that landed really well, and why?
I had a really simple one just when I started this process, which is it's still one I'm working through. So, um, my new mentor sort of said, "Oh, he started working with a mentor about 10 years ago," and this chap said to him, "You need to work out what you want out of the rest of your life." And and so basically, my mentor dropped this on me and then went to the loo, and I'm like, So he came back and went, "Don't worry, it took me 6 months to work that out." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he said, "And these are the things I went," and he went through and he said, "I'm not expecting you to say the same things, but actually, how often do we sit and ask ourselves, what do we want out of life, and then work toward a plan against it?" And that's what some of the early stuff we've started to do. But it just hadn't really occurred to me to ask myself that question until that point. And it's really valuable. And then he left me hanging, and I'm thinking, "Oh, I really shouldn't know the answer to this." And then he said, "Oh no,
Mhm.
it took 6 months." I'm like, "Okay, it's a process. That's good actually." And then we work through techniques. So yeah, that's a simple one for me, I guess.
I love
Great, thank you. And I guess it landed well because the way he left you with that sense that I need to have the answer by the time he's back, and then to have the permission to take more time.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about it is it involves a little bit of visualizing, but it also involves a little bit of work. So he knew the way he explained it is he'd worked out the things he didn't want to do and the things he did want to do, and he'd set himself some financial goals, but he'd also set himself some other non-financial goals. And what I'm particularly working with this guy on is not only trying to find work success, if you like, but also just overall life success, because the balance is not easy to reach. But actually, you still do need to have certain targets, otherwise, you're just going to be floating around and so on. So, I've taken some steps off the back of that. But as I say, it's sort of it's just given me a sort of, instead of lying awake at night, sort of worrying about this thing I've got to do, or whatever, I'm sort of, if I can't sleep, I'm then thinking about, okay, well, let's think about some of the things I want to be able to achieve. And it's, of course, never just you, is it? Because we've all got families and commitments and things. So it's a wider piece than just that. But I'd say it's almost just it's a simple way of just sort of starting at a very wide funnel and just trying to funnel it in onto, okay, if you want X, what do you have to do to achieve it? Can you achieve it? Have you got the tools you need, etc., etc.? So, I think it will probably take me a few months as well, maybe not 6 months, but it's just framed the conversation really nicely. And yeah, the going to the toilet thing was a complete fluke. It just really helped. So, but anyway, so yeah, and I think
Amazing.
It's good structure. So yeah.
Thank you. Saskia, or I don't know, Joseph, if you're off your call, yeah. Have you got anything that you'd like to share? Otherwise, I'll come to Marcia.
I'll let Marcia go first and then I'll jump in. I've been thinking about my answer.
I've been thinking about specific instances. There's two that I can think of, but I just wanted to follow on from what you were saying, Guy. And I think it's really important, whether it's with a mentee or anybody that you're working with that's thinking about what they're going to do in the future, is keep bringing them back to that vision of what's down the road for them. And if they don't take steps, what's the worst that could happen? And how do they feel as they sit in that place where, it's really not good and it's not where I want to be? And then take them back to, but your vision was that, and how do you feel? And I think just that reminder for them, it just kind of keeps people on track. But you do go off track at times, right? But yeah, just being able to sit in that vision of, I really want to get there, and this is how I'm going to feel. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to be doing that. Is really important as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that sentiment. And I saw a post, I think a female quotient, I mean, not spell that right, but there was a post, she's like, I want to live a big life. And I'm like, yeah, I want to live a big life. Like, how do I do that? What does that look like? I'm like, how do I achieve that? And I never used to want to have a big life. I just kind of had been going through the motions of life, thinking I needed to do X and Y. I've had a child. I've ticked that box. Like now what do I do? I'm gonna get him raised and out of my house at some point. But like, what do I want? What to what do I want to achieve? What are my goals? But a lot of that comes from self-awareness, and I wasn't always self-aware. And one thing I found really hard was receiving feedback. I would get quite defensive when feedback was given to me. I said to a friend, I'm like, how do I stop being so defensive? Like, I like learning. I like understanding what these things are that are blocking me, but I am very defensive to that feedback. And I realized it's how it's being delivered or how I'm perceiving that feedback. And so what I found was really helpful for me was like, can you write it to me? Like, can you write this feedback to me so that I can digest it, have my emotional reaction, and then come to you and be a partner with you in terms of so solving for that, or coming up with ideas to not feel so defensive, like what's the root cause, really understanding that, versus in the moment, being defensive, saying, yeah, but it wasn't me, it was this thing, but I didn't do that. And I think it really helped when my friend said, like, that will just improve with that self-confidence, and when you sort of really trust yourself, because you won't need to be so defensive, because you'll know what truth is. And how he presented that, I stuck it on a little piece of paper, and I had that in front of me for a long time until I've sort of been a lot calmer to that. And now I'm very open to feedback, because feedback helps me grow. And so, yeah, I've had a very interesting journey with feedback. So I really like this session.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate your vulnerability. And I share that initial defensiveness to feedback pattern. And many years ago, somebody who was a peer, but somebody that I would bounce ideas off, so probably an informal mentor rather than a formal mentor, said to me, do you realize that other people's opinions of you are not your business? They've got nothing to do with you. And it took me an awfully long time to really be able to accept and embody that. And the realization that it's perhaps their stuff and their reactions and their but also it's not. I can accept that feedback with gratitude, and or I can choose not to do anything with it. But it really, how they feel about me isn't my business. So if that is also helpful, I'll offer you that one. Um, what feels unhelpful then? What feels frustrating or hard to hear? And what makes it that way?
Mm. Mind if I go? Anybody?
Yeah, go for it.
And this was going to be one of the ones I was going to answer in the previous bit, but it wasn't a mentor. It was a line manager. And I was their HR business partner at the time, and he'd done something wrong. I mean, it was really wrong. And I'd given him some feedback on it, and he told me I was aggressive. But you're being aggressive was a reaction to me saying to him, you shouldn't be taking that action. You know, how you're acting with your team isn't the right way. So it's about, and I think what you were saying as well, Sarah, about taking on his frustration with me because I'm saying you can't do that, and then coming back at me with something to try and disarm me more than anything else. It wasn't a moment where we should be having a feedback moment. It was you're aggressive, and it was just trying to stop me from continuing. And I think being able to help mentees, because these situations happen all the time in the workplace or anywhere in life, how do we then support them to say, actually, you shouldn't take that on, or maybe there should be a response to that, or just let it go? Or if you have that feedback from somewhere else, is that something that we need to talk about and work on together? So I think it's been able to distinguish those situations very, very quickly. But yeah, that he didn't disarm me, by the way. I continued by it. So, okay. But yeah, sometimes people come at you with things with not the right intention, and it's just being able to spot that in the moment, or actually very quickly after, just sit with it and try and understand the situation. Is this something that I need to take on? Is it feedback for me, or is it somebody just venting? And that's fine. I'm just going to put it to one side.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a couple of filters that we can apply to that that can be quite helpful. Is that person giving you feedback somebody that you would ask the opinion of in the first instance? And if not, then their feedback probably less useful or yet less meaningful. And one that I often actually I'm using with my 11-year-old at the moment, is it a red flag or is it a red feeling? So is it about my reaction to the thing because that's a feeling? Or is it a red flag because it's something that actually needs to be addressed?
I like that.
And it's not easy. It's definitely not easy for a slightly cross 11-year-old, nor a slightly cross 52-year-old, to be frank. But I find it useful. Sometimes, like you say, Marcia, it's only in retrospect that you can get the clarity on which of those it is. Thank you. Does anybody else? Oh, sorry, carry on, Ian.
Yeah, I was thinking, like for me, feedback. I've always learned that if it isn't specific or if it isn't timely, then it loses its positive impact. It can still have quite a lot of negative impact. So if it's like 6 months afterwards in a half yearly review, somebody might say, "Oh, I think this," and you kind of go, "Wow, hang on, what? Like that? You've wasted 6 months of my life, so to speak." And I always have a thing where, and I've learned, teams that I lead, I look to make sure there's no surprises when it comes to those sorts of conversations. don't keep things, spare and aside for that sort of thing. So, if people are walking into a performance review, there shouldn't be a surprise as to how they're performing, because there should have been multiple conversations running up to that. And it's very much you created space for a longer, detailed conversation, maybe a bit more about development and, that sort of stuff. So, but performance wise, that should have been boxed off beforehand. So, not immediate is always a bad one for me, not specific. So if somebody talks about your attitude, and you're like, well, what's that then? Where's the example? And again, I'm a massive fan of examples, because if you're into an example, then you could talk about specifically what was going on at the time. And whilst, from, as you mentioned, Saskia, defensiveness, sometimes that can raise defensiveness because you're into an example, but at least you're in the conversation with each other, and you're talking about that thing that happened. Here's how I saw it. And you can tell me how you were feeling at the time, and I can understand a bit more about that then, and maybe my view of how I felt differs, rather than just that kind of bland attitude, or even worse, something personal that you're just like, wow, that's that's pretty terrible. So yeah, that's kind of like what I've learned over the years about feedback, and how it can be something really positive, and you can walk away and somebody that has a gift to sort of do something with.
Yeah. I don't think there's enough thought or training given to how to give quick, in the moment feedback that's really focused on behavior and impact,
Yes.
versus, like you say, saving it all up for the annual review.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some really bad examples of it. I had a chap I met recently who's an old friend of mine again, and he'd been in a new company for 9 weeks, and he's in local in his 50s, and his boss had him in tears because his boss wanted him to CC him on every single outbound email, and this guy was very aggressively basically correcting these emails and telling him he should do it this
Wow.
particular way. And that's a real example of a really awful toxic culture and a toxic experience. But then I've got some young people that I'm doing some work with, and every time I'm asking them improvement, I'm asking their opinion of it. What do they think? And then how would they feel about giving it a try? And then asking them, is it working for them? Because there might be something that's not working, but I don't have all the answers. I've got some ideas about solving the answers, but I'm not an expert in everything, and none of us are. But that approach of sort of raising it and firstly getting them to agree, do you agree it's not working, yes or no? And that's not always a binary answer either. But then, okay, how about we try some of this, and we just work through it together? I would say that it takes a little bit more time, but actually, eventually, people will sort of almost, you'll just have this mutual permission. They're going to go, actually, I'm going to change this anyway. It's not quite working. I'm going to take on myself to change it. Do you agree? And it almost comes back to me to say, yeah, fine, of course, crack on with that. And so that whole conversational approach, which you can have, if things are going well, maybe you have it once a week to check in. But if things are not going well, you might have it 2 or 3 times a day, even, or maybe not two. Depends what you're actually doing as a role. But this particular example is contact center agents. So there's some specific things they're trying to deal with on specific types of calls. So therefore, maybe even every call is a learning experience. But I guess it's not so much about the cadence. I guess it's just more about the conversational approach, and them being comfortable with the idea, then trying to execute the idea, and then us all reviewing it together feels to me a much better approach than you're doing this wrong and I'm going to be horrible to you about it, obviously. But anyway, I'm trying to get that guy out of that company, but it's not my job to do that. But you feel bad because you don't want your friends to be so upset. But anyway, it's what it is. So.
It is horrifying when you hear some of the stories of how people choose to lead. And you almost want to say too that, how would you be reacting to being managed in this way yourself? Like, why are you feeling like this is a useful way forward?
Honestly, there is a school of thought that some very, very senior leaders put out, which is there should be an element of fear in every single leader. And I, I've just never been one of those sorts of people. So if I'm going to be in a leadership position, then that's just not how I'm going to work. And the best leaders I've always worked with, you've always wanted them to go into battle for you if you're in like a big organization, but you always know they're going to do that with a sense of reasonableness and So therefore you want them to do that. So there are times where there is conflict because there's one lot of resources that two parts of an organization are going for or whatever, and you want those guys to absolutely have your back and therefore in theory go into battle for you, but actually it's still done in a reasonable way. And so I just, for me, I say this whole fear in leadership, I just don't agree with it at all. But there is a big school of thought where people think that's the case, and I think that's rubbish. And I think we see it a lot in politics, unfortunately, growingly around the world, which is not ideal. But in business, I've worked in some very big American companies, and you see it a lot in there. But I've also worked in some small organisations where the CEO ruled with a rod of iron, and that was pretty awful as well. So for me, as soon as fear's involved, I don't personally, that's not the right company for me. But anyway, you can't always you can always choose, can you? So.
I feel like maybe part of their leadership journey as well, they've had those kind of bosses and they've looked at those bosses and yes, it hurt them at the time, but they got through or the boss was successful. So they think, well, then I need to do that as well to become successful. And not recognizing that that doesn't work for everybody. It might work for some people, but not for everyone.
And the claim is it makes you more resilient. It doesn't. It just beats you down a bit more, and it affects your confidence. Ian talked about earlier, and and so I guess resilience is built from all sorts of different ways, and resilience is useful in the workplace. But every single person is different, and so a word like resilience is just a bit of a lazy word, really, because you might be not struggling to cope with something at work for nothing to do with work, and then does that make you not resilient? No, it's nothing to do with it. So for me, but that's the umbrella term it's used under. Oh yeah, I did that, and it's like what they used to say about people going to boarding school or whatever, and it's all BS, right? And in a modern world, there is no reason why we can't be reasonable and nice to each other, even when we have to have difficult conversations. And yet, we are where we are.
Yeah. A topic very close to my heart, and I'm very aware that I could go down a rabbit hole with you here now, Guy, and I won't. So thinking about
So just on that, there is one final thing though. What I've found is the worst person I work for a genuine psychopath for less than a year, and I am still friends with about 8 or 9 people who worked with me in that year under that psychopath because we all used to just go to the pub and whinge at each other, and we got to learn a lot about our lives. And I don't believe any of us would ever behave the way that we were treated. And so it's been really good for us, almost as a counterpoint, as how not to behave. But actually, it's not made us more resilient. It's just made us friends. Which is quite interesting. Anyway, there we
go. The bonding through shared trauma. Yes. So thinking about your experiences when you've been mentees, what makes it easier for you to ask for feedback or to respond positively to feedback? So Saskia, you gave us a brilliant example earlier about asking for it to be written so that you can read it, so you can absorb and reflect on it prior to a conversation, which I think is a fabulous way of doing it if you know that you're prone to defensiveness. But what else could you do or have you done as a mentee that has made it easier for you to receive feedback?
Definitely one of them that I've been working on a lot, and this applies to my whole life. So it's not simply just in the workplace. That is the phrase I choose to respond versus react. And that hasn't always been easy. But having that front and center on a piece of paper, I have the opportunity now where I'm like, oh, this has triggered me, or this has made me think things that I'm like, it's not true, or, I'm really cross and frustrated. That red mist sort of comes along. I'm very lucky I have good friends that can enjoy my capital letter text messages when the red mist is strong. But it means that I protect the outcome because I'm given that moment to decompress it all, to challenge my thinking, to have someone who's happy to be that bouncing ball was like, Sophia, but like you actually did the wrong thing here. I don't want to hear that. But then having those safe containers with certain people that are outside of the situation that can challenge your own thoughts so that you can come back to that situation going, yep, I hear you. Yeah, that was really tough to hear. I appreciate you telling me though, because if you hadn't told me, I wouldn't have known. This is how I'd like to move forward. Or to be honest, I'm really stuck. I don't know how to move forward. Can you show me what that looks like? Can you give me an example of that? Can you help me do this differently because I am willing, I do want to learn, I am aware enough of it that I know for you to come to me, that means I need to take action. But sometimes you don't know how. And so it's asking for what you need, and it's asking for a format that you will take it on board in the most effective way as well.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. Stephen Covey talks about that in a slightly different context, and I love that. So he talks about the word responsibility being about our ability to respond, and it's that gap between the action and the response, which when we get to choose what we do.
Yeah. I was thinking of it as like taking ownership. So feedback is something you receive, but it's also something that you can go out and ask for, isn't it? So I think it's kind of like, particularly in situations you're new to, and then going to people that you trust, and therefore you'll listen. Hey, I'd really love to hear some feedback from you on this thing that's coming up. And by the way, like sometimes I can be a bit sensitive about things. It would really help me if you were really specific. There was like some detail to what we were talking about, and we kind of got into things a little bit more. So again, it's like I'm taking ownership of this thing that I want, and it's not about. I don't think it's about kind of just tell me good things. It's just sort of like this is the way I receive feedback best. So it's like it's not saying, hey, here's your opportunity to give me a kick in or tell me I'm crap. It's an opportunity to kind of give me genuine feedback. These things work really well. These things I think didn't land quite as well. I think you need to consider that and what was going on there at that time. So yeah, I think just building on what you were saying, for me, it's taking ownership of that feedback so that it's not unsolicited from a variety of different people in a way that you can't quite navigate or get the best from.
Mm. Awesome. Thank you. What makes you feel safe or confident as a mentee to give feedback to your mentor or to pass, I want to say speak truth to power, which possibly isn't quite the situation within a mentor-mentee relationship, but where you are wanting to pass feedback back up the line or up to your mentor, across to your mentor. What helps you to be able to do that?
I think one thing between the mentor and mentee relationship, I think is critical at the beginning, is the contracting. How are we going to be together? And I think in that you then have the agreement of, if I need to feedback to you as a mentee, what does that look like for you? Can I just drop it into a conversation? Do I need to put it into an email and we follow it up and talk about it? I think empowering mentees at the beginning to be able to give that feedback to you as a mentor is really, really crucial. But both sides being very clear, if it's a bit sticky feedback, how do you receive that? Because this is what I'm thinking of how I would want to give it to you. I think that's crucial.
Yeah, and that one of the things we talked about when we were creating Future Leaders was that challenge of the mentor-mentee relationship, and usually the mentor has a scarier job title, I guess. So when you're putting two people together that previously didn't know each other, the job title is the thing that might grab somebody. So we do a lot, of work there in just trying to get past that, and I guess set things up as you're just two people, and how do you contract in that first conversation to kind of say, you know, I'm as a mentor, I'm learning as part of this experience too. It's not just, hey, here's my experience, I'm just going to vomit it out to you and you'll catch it or not. It's I the really the best mentoring relationship I've had is where I walk away feeling like I've done that thing. The mentee said, "Oh, I had a great experience today. I did this thing," and I walk away foolishly thinking it was me that did it, and I'm walking on air for the rest of the day. But yeah, I think it's that contracting, it's that building trust from the very beginning, And more in leadership, and we should do more and more of this, is, revealing your imperfections and kind of going, hey, like, you can trust me with your imperfections because listen, I've got plenty of those too. So really trying to build that trust up really quickly, so that if then somebody says, actually, and you were talking way too much in that mentoring session, I need you to listen more, then I'll be like, yeah, cool, I got that.
Brilliant. And aligns beautifully with what Marcia just popped in the chat around showing vulnerability. Because if, as a mentor, you show that vulnerability, that really helps put others at ease, and they can feel that they don't have to be perfect. So I've certainly found that a couple of times with mentees and with coaching clients, that they come almost wanting to show that everything's fine and all of the stuff that they're doing really well. It's like, that's great. If we're going to really move you forward, I need to see the bits that aren't great. So I'll share my vulnerabilities and my mistakes along the way to help you feel comfortable and confident in the moment to go, right, okay, we can share our messiness here.
Yeah, I agree with what everybody said there, and I think one of the things that helps with this is in that very first sort of session when you're sort of getting to know each other, maybe having a little bit of structured questions that you can use, almost like it's down the pub, even it may even be down the pub, but actually having a little bit of structure just so that there's an opportunity for you to show a bit about yourself, find some common ground, and yeah, if it's appropriate, sort of share vulnerabilities. I always go with I'm really keen. It tends to be, I'm working with younger people. I'm really keen to understand their perspective, and so the meeting is absolutely a meeting of equals because their perspective is different to mine. I'm really keen to understand it, and that's the basis that we go forward. And then depending upon how what the exact situation is, there might be some stuff where we talk about, I know, family or football teams or whatever the thing is, where we can just get a bit of a conversation going, and then we can then just bring it back to, depending on what the type of stuff is. But it tends to be something that is in and around performance, but it is also around um, trajectory of sort of going from point A to point B, which is obviously what mentoring is about. But it's built upon, I guess, knowing more about the individual, but as you say, also perhaps where there are some things where we're sort of sharing, say, let's call them vulnerabilities, that the mentor is going first in that scenario. So they're making the conversation. And equally, at any point, and the other thing I say a lot is, if you don't feel comfortable answering any of these, that's fine. Just, but let's find what you are comfortable about. Because that's the other thing. If you're not careful, people feel sort of backed into a bit of a corner if you've overshared, and they just don't want to do that. So you have to sort of constantly ask for permission in a gentle way, I would say, which I think works.
Yeah. Thank you. What have you done in the past, or what do you tend to do to check whether your feedback's been helpful or not, to check the impact that it's had and how the other person's experienced it?
I'll tell you what's happened more with me than not is when it's worked, I get a text or or a WhatsApp message or something. And then when it hasn't, we might touch on it in another session, because sometimes it's just a conversation, of course, isn't it? So it's not necessarily a specific thing, but where there are some specific tips, quite often you'll just get a quick message back saying, oh, yeah, that thing worked. Thank you very much. And that's great. My time was well spent.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a friend of mine who was very excited to hear the news that I'd come to join and said, I'm definitely client number one, like I was the first, she just like stuck a like claim on that, which I'm like very grateful. But what she shared is how some feedback that I had shared with her was really helpful, but equally where she tried something that I suggested and said, no, I'm not ready for that. And just allowing for that, sort of checking in, what was it that you found so challenging about that? Like only share what you're comfortable sharing with. just so that I can have a pulse on that to know, okay, that's a quite a sensitive topic. We need to maybe wait a little bit longer, or maybe work on something different. Or you're at a point where you're ready to address that and move forward on that point. But then what they did share with me was just this amazing work that they've been doing, and how they've really prioritized themselves, which I was really pleased to hear, where that did actually encourage them and get them in a different direction that's going to uplift them more, where they're not quite ready to touch on a different area, which growth all happens in different ways and goes down different pathways. So yeah,
Mm.
just I think that like you're saying, Guy, is that feedback where they're coming to you and sharing. You didn't even know that you were having that ripple effect. You just suggested a book, and leaving it off to if you're going to buy that book or not. Um,
Lovely. So thinking about being slightly more challenging perhaps with our mentees, when we get the sense that they're perhaps avoiding a particular area, or they're not really doing what we've been talking about. How comfortable are you, or what helps you feel more comfortable to actually be slightly challenging with them, with your mentee, to say, we've talked about this a few times, I'm not seeing anything changing, why is that, or whatever it might be. What tools do you employ in those situations? Ian, have you got any? You're on mute.
Sorry,
No
sorry.
worries.
Um, again, I've definitely learned over the years that candor is always the way. And I guess depending on the relationship I've got, I can either be really quite direct, um, or it'll have some subtlety to it. I mean, it's all delivered with kindness. There's no anger or aggression to it, but it's really direct. It's kind of like, so this is something we've talked about a number of times. Either I've got it wrong, that this isn't important to you, or it just hasn't bubbled up. What's going on for you? So there's no ambiguity. There's a real, let's talk about this thing directly and find out what's going on for you. It could be that that's one of a repeating pattern. So I'll maybe talk about it as a pattern rather than an isolated thing. So we can talk about it as a bigger issue. But for me, it's always about dealing with it head on, understanding the compassionate side of it. Could be quite a difficult conversation, but nobody's going to thank me in 12 months' time if they still haven't accelerated their development because I've been a really kind, soft mentor.
I think there's, yes, I think there's a thing about implications of doing or not doing something. So where you are, when something's been identified as difficult but necessary, but we've agreed some potential ways forward or ways of addressing it. As you input it, it's not quite bubbled to the surface. There's just almost a conversation around, well, if you don't solve this or you don't do this, what's that going to lead to? Because we're all guilty of putting off difficult things at times. But I think sort of going back to the reason it was identified in the first place and understanding those implications probably then sort of sometimes can just sort of, to use Ian's language, sort of rebubble it to the surface and hopefully create perhaps a simpler way forward or a different way forward, or because sometimes it just needs talking about a few different times until you find the right way through. And sometimes there is just like a eureka moment when whatever that thing is that needs to be done gets done well or whatever, and then that's almost problem solved straight away. And it really does depend on the sorts of problems you're trying to solve. But I do think sometimes looking at the sort of the so what element, the implications is to say is a good way of addressing it without necessarily, you don't have to be direct, or you can be, but it's up to you how you handle the conversation. But I do think, as I say, the so what or the implication discussion is a good way around it.
Yeah. There's a number of years ago, I was on a coaching course where, kind of building on what you were saying there, Guy, one of the methods that they were using was almost like so now that we know how to solve this, out of 10, how likely are you to go off and do it? And then they say, oh, an 8, and you kind of go, okay, so what's like in that gap then? What's stopping you from doing this immediately? And just sort of edging towards that. And I definitely thought that was a pretty decent technique in understanding what are those hurdles, what are those barriers to you just going off and doing it. Yeah, so that was another way of kind of just laser focused on. So what's stopping you then?
Mm. I love that. I use that quite a lot. And it's exactly that. Like whatever the number is,
Hmm.
what would you need to get it one more than that? Or what would a 10 even look like?
Yeah, yeah. It's like numbers. It's a funny thing, isn't it? Like most people don't even go for a 10 because that's perfection. Like what are you going to do with a 10? But the conversation there, okay, yeah, actually, I've
Mm,
said 8, but there's nothing in the way.
mm,
Get on with it.
yeah. Or I've had a couple of times where someone said, well, actually, if I'm being really honest, I'm at a 2 here. Right, okay, so we really need to dig into it now. Like, what is in the way?
Hmm.
It can be incredibly informative.
I think for me as well, sometimes I will ask them where they are with it, but I would just kind of soften my voice and then I almost sit back. So I'm still here, but I'm giving them some space to think about, well, actually, do you know what? We did talk about this and I haven't done that. And these are the reasons why, rather than me jumping in and saying, well, you should have gone and done this, you should have gone and done that. Just give them the space because they know where they should be going because we've discussed it. So yeah, I think just giving them for me, sitting back and giving them that space and saying nothing and then see where they go with it. That works for me.
Mm. Silence is very powerful, isn't it? And funnily enough, something that as a Geordie I'm quite uncomfortable with.
As an only child, I've grown.
Um, what about when you've wanted to give feedback, where you've recognized, and Guy, you kind of touched on it just then as well, where you've felt that there is something there and that you've wanted to give the feedback, but you've put it off or you've shied away from it for some reason. What's underneath that moment of not giving the feedback or not being direct?
I think sometimes there's a focus thing, and also so how ready is someone ready to hear something, and where are they in a conversation, and where are they at a sort of overall feeling of well-being, but also some people, and I'm one of them, do not like being in any way told what to do. And so if you've agreed something and you're going to have a go at it, it's okay to check in on the thing, but the indirectness then allows them to almost tell themselves to do it. Whereas if you go directly, if someone does direct me, and I'm just not sure how because I don't like being told what to do, so it has to be suggested or asked. It doesn't mean you can't ask it in a direct way, but like it becomes a bit like a nag if you're not careful. So I think it's just a psychological technique for people like me who don't like being told what to do. But I think it's a slightly gentler approach anyway. And I always think things get done better if people come to it themselves. So you can guide and you can suggest, but people have to come to it themselves, ideally, I would say, in most cases. So that's kind of why that indirect approach, I think, works quite nicely.
Love that. And the working out or getting that insight about whether someone is pressure sensitive or not. And therefore, how do you approach it in a way that gets them to the point, like you say, like it's their idea or they're wanting to, or they're really behind it, rather than feeling that it's another chore or another demand on them.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I struggle with, though, is when they ask my direct opinion, what do you think I should do? Or should I do this, yes or no, that sort of thing. And I'm I have opinions, of course, and there's an individual who's part of Future Leaders who I think has made a recent terrible decision about where he's gone to work, but that's his choice to make, and he'll work it out, or it won't. It may not be just my opinion, and I'm not even his mentor. I just happen to like the guy, and I've kept an eye on his career because potentially would have hired him at some point. But he, in my mind, has sort of probably made a mistake. But in mentoring scenarios, if someone asks me that, I will try to give an honest answer, but I will also make sure that there's enough room for them to feel comfortable making a decision for themselves. So I think that's more important, even if sometimes mistakes get made, because it's not healthy to make decisions because of someone else's opinion. And if you are going to go get lots of different people, get opinions, get lots of them, but also still, have a mechanism for making decisions yourself. So I just, that's a kind of throwing a problem out there, but that is something that I struggle with, is when I get asked a what should I do type question. If it's a scenario based thing about something at work, it's what's right, you try that and that's fine. But if it's something more about like a career step or whatever, that sort of thing, that's something that I struggle with, because I don't really want to be on the hook for telling them what to do, and I don't think that's healthy anyway, as I've just said. So yeah. I don't know if that answers your question or adds another discussion.
It adds a really interesting dimension. And Marcia, I'd quite like to put you on the spot to see how you cope with that. In your role, I'm sure many times you get asked for a what should I do? How do you tend to approach that?
I kind of sidestep that, to be honest with you, because it's not about what I would do, it's about what's right for you. So I can either give an example from my career, I've had something similar and this is what I did, and just leave that with them. Ask them the direct question, what do you think you should be doing? Or so it depends on the person. Sometimes I go back to if you don't take action, what's that going to look like for you? But if you do take action, what does it look like? So I think I use a combination of those methods, but yeah, I don't say to anybody, you go and do that now, then after you do that, then you do that, and then you do that, because they have to be in control of that. They have to feel comfortable with it. And when they get to where they want to get to, they need to be able to look back and say, I did that, and this was my decision making.
And they learn so much more from it, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent as well. Nice. Yeah. I've suddenly realised that we are rapidly approaching the end. I was like, we've still got ages. Oh no, we haven't. We've got like 3 minutes left. Is there any burning questions that any of you came today with thinking, I'd love to know how to do this better or differently?
I think you've done a really good job of preparing really good questions for us to dive into, and that we've covered a lot of information and gone off on little journeys of topics that have come back to the root cause of what this call is all about. And so I think I've benefited a lot from listening and being able to have the opportunity to partake in it as well.
Great, thank you. And that's why sometimes it's lovely when there's 14 people here and we can have a nice big group, but there's something about a smaller group and the conversations that we can have in a smaller setting that's really useful. As I say, I will put it onto YouTube as well. I'll take the transcript and make it into a blog, so that if you are more or less visual versus reading, writing in your preferences, it'll be available for you to come back to and look at. And if you've got ideas for future, so our very next session towards the end of July is set. The ones after that, we've not yet nailed down the content. So if there's a particular topic that you think will be really useful for us to discuss in these workshops, I would love to hear from you, and hopefully see you at future events as well. Any feedback, I'd love to hear it. What was good, what was indifferent, or what was not great for you. Drop me a note. And I promise not to be defensive. I will read it and then respond. And it's been a real pleasure spending a slightly sunny Friday lunchtime with you all.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all.
Yes, it's been great. Thank you so much.
So much.
Cheers, guys. Catch you later.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.